Hello, and welcome to The Writers Co-op, a business podcast for freelance writers everywhere.
We are your co-hosts. I am Wudan Yan.
And I'm Jenni Gritters.
We are so excited to be back.
Thanks for tuning into episode 2. This week we are going to be talking all about money. Money.
We talk about money so much via text message.
Seriously, it's important. I think it's kind of what inspired this podcast, but you can't write good things if you don't have enough money to have a stable lifestyle.
We literally almost called this podcast F You Pay Me per popular request by almost everyone we surveyed.
All of our friends, yes.
Yes, but we thought that would be a bit too forward.
Yeah, I think even though we went with a more conservative name, we're still going to talk a lot about money in each episode of this podcast, but today we're going to focus on kind of the big picture philosophical money questions and think about how to get paid, because that really is one of the major hurdles of freelancing.
So to this point, we're going to be pretty transparent in this first money episode about how we've each set up our own finances, our own financial privilege, because we think it's important to talk about money even though it can be awkward. We'll even tell you how much we make every year.
Yeah, I really like to be explicit about my finances and talk about how much I make. I know some people think that's bizarre, but I really think it's the only way for us all to move forward. It's the rising tide lifts all boats sort of theory.
Specifically, we're going to spend time today talking about cultivating your money mindset. So how to set up a financial system that works for you, how to figure out how much you want to make, and importantly, how you think about money philosophically.
So during our first episode of the season, if you haven't listened to it yet, we recommend going back and doing that before you listen to this one. But during that first episode, we talked about values and how determining your values or what you care about is important for building a sustainable freelance business. So today's episode, which is about money, builds off of that. Your money mindset, or how you think about money, can help you determine how to set up your schedule and pick your rates. It's how you build something that gets you living a life that you love. And I really believe that you have to vocalize what you want, especially financially, in order to get it.
If there's anything we want you to take away from this episode, it's that your money mindset governs how you work. It also affects the quality of your work, because getting paid more usually allows you to spend more time doing good work. All that said, where do we start?
So I think maybe we should start by talking about how we each personally think about money, go a little bit meta. So what does money mean to you, and what is your relationship with it? Hardball question.
Oh, that's deep. Oh yeah, no softball questions on this podcast.
Never.
So my parents immigrated to the United States with me, so I grew up with this sort of scarcity mindset around money. The one thing I will never forget about my childhood is this small accordion file my mom had with coupons for literally every single store imaginable. Saving money and trying to live within my means has been really ingrained in me practically all along. And as an adult, I've been pretty good at not going in the red with money. The first job I had out of college paid me about $26,000 to work as a research assistant in Houston, Texas. Texas, on the plus side, has no state income tax. My studio was about $600 a month, and somehow I was able to make do. And then I was in a PhD program for a while in New York City. My stipend was, $35,000 a year. My housing was subsidized through the Research Institute, and I was never really paying more than $900 a month or so for rent, if I recall correctly. Somehow, even though I was living in a very expensive place, I made it work.
That's some serious budgeting. I'm very impressed.
Yeah. Then the first year I went full on freelance. So this was after I spent my first year mostly in a full-time tutoring job. I made around $40,000 to $42,000, and I was still building up my client base then. It wasn't a bad year, but I was hustling like crazy. I took on a lot of assignments that in retrospect didn't pay enough, but I needed to build my portfolio, and there's that really tough trade-off I felt as a young writer. But relative to how much I've earned otherwise post-college, that felt like a lot. And I was able to manage that money and make it last. But it is interesting to think about our relationships with money, that they start from when we're young.
Yeah, I think we're all raised with certain ideas about money and what money means. For me, I was raised in a household where finances were kind of presented like a puzzle I needed to solve. So for me, money isn't emotional, it's sort of cerebral, but my husband is the total opposite. I know for him, money talks are really stressful and emotional. Like we usually schedule them over beers or good food to kind of dull the pain for him. So your original mindset often, I think, depends on how finances were discussed or not discussed in your home when you were a kid.
For sure. And my parents were very practical about money. I remember when my dad immigrated to the US, he was in grad school. He earned a living by delivering pizza on the side. So I've never really had shame about where my money was coming from as long as the means of which I was earning it was ethical. Tell us about your story, Jenni.
So, this is a story that my friends love, but when I was 16, my parents gave me all of my allowance for the whole year in one go in January. So, I think it was maybe $1,000, and I had to track my expenses on an Excel spreadsheet. I was 16. So, essentially, they were teaching me how to keep a budget. And if I did a good job, I got a little bit more money the following year. So, I was this kid who went out to like buy my own back to school clothes and lunches, and I was meticulously saving my receipts and charting it all in a spreadsheet. It was very intense for being 16.
Wait, hold up. So you somehow spent an average of $2.74 a day. I mathed it out.
Yeah, thank you for doing that math. Yes, I think so.
How did you do that? Did you have money left over?
Yeah, I think I spent pretty much every single penny of that allowance. Keep in mind, my parents were still buying groceries, paying for my gas, that sort of thing. But I had to learn to budget for anything beyond the necessities. So the amount was supposed to cover all of my discretionary spends. So, for example, if I got a coffee one day before school, I couldn't get it the next day. Or if I needed new jeans, I had to not buy anything for the next few weeks. I packed my lunch a lot while a lot of my friends would go out and get food. You know, there's a joke in my family that my dad had to give me socks every Christmas because I would never use my own money to buy socks because I thought that was a boring way to spend the little money I had. And then all my socks had holes in them. So someone said to me the other day, "You've been running a business since you were 16." And I do think that's actually sort of true. But I'm thankful that my dad taught me a lot of this stuff early on because I definitely still use it now. And I'm really savings minded because of it.
How does that trickle down into your freelancing business?
Compared to most people, I think I'm just generally very meticulous about knowing where my money is coming from and going to. I've been really explicit from the start as well that I want to make a lot of money. Like I said, I sort of see money as this like puzzle, and I want to make a lot of money. There's no shame in saying that.
Remember what we said in episode 1, be shameless.
Yeah, when I decided to launch my business, I did a bunch of math to figure out how much I needed to make to bring in every month to pay my bills and do the things I wanted to do, like travel or take maternity leave. And that information helped me determine and stick to my rates, which helped me stick to my financial goals. So I love talking about this stuff. But what about you? How did you think about money when you first got started? And do you think that's different now?
I would say a big part of my financial privilege is that I don't have any student loan debt. And I'm really amazed by my parents. You know, they immigrated with hardly any money and they've managed to earn enough in the past 3 decades here to put me and my brother through college. And I didn't want to go to journalism school because I was so terrified of student loans. I actively did not want to spend money on an education that I thought I could learn by trade. So when I embarked on my full-time freelance career after tutoring, after a short stint in Thailand, which I kind of don't really count because it was so cheap to live there. Literally, I could live kind of a fancied life where I could travel once a month on like $2,500 a month.
That's amazing.
I know. I wanted to make at least $3,000 a month here when I moved to Seattle. That didn't sound like much to me, but it'd be more than I was making in grad school, and I knew I'd be able to budget accordingly otherwise.
Okay, so that raises a big question and one that I often talk through with people when we're doing coaching sessions. How do you determine how much you need to make every month? Like, how did you figure that out?
I usually like to total up the basics.
Yeah, that's my method too. It's sort of basic budgeting. So when I started, I looked at a few months of my husband and my past finances to figure out our monthly expenses. And knowing that helped me figure out that I needed to make $8,000 each month. I know that sounds like a lot, but we have quite a bit of student loan debt and I just gave birth, so we have a kid. I knew I would need to see about $6,500 in my bank account if I accounted for that 25% of the money that was going to go to taxes. So $8,000 a month became my number.
By the way, if you're a Patreon All Access member, you'll get an email not only with tips and tricks for this episode, but there will be a worksheet in there to help you figure out all your monthly target income stuff. We're not going to go through the nitty-gritty, but
yeah, I think that worksheet is going to explain a little bit about how both of us do what is essentially budgeting and financial planning for ourselves and our businesses. And I do want to say it doesn't really matter what system you use. You could use a spreadsheet, you can use an app like Mint, whatever. But the important thing is finding information about your financial behaviors so you can make decisions about what you need your business to do for you.
depending on where you live and what your lifestyle is like, that number might be in the thousands like ours. That number might look big and scary, but don't panic. I think that's a gateway for you to be bold and ask for more money.
Yeah, I think a lot of people didn't believe me in the beginning when I said I was going to make $8,000 a month, but because I had that number in my head and I knew how much I needed to cover monthly, I could ask my clients for payment that would help me meet that goal, and I could pick clients that were able to help aid my financial plan, right? So to calculate your rates, which I think is a really important part of this puzzle and something we will also include in that worksheet, you need to figure out that monthly number and then divide it by the number of hours that you plan to work. And then that's what you charge your clients. So for me, I rarely go under $50 an hour for my work. If I charge less than that, I won't meet my monthly goal, or I might, but I might have to do double the amount of work to get there. I'm also going to say this like 17 times in this podcast, but
It's probably going to be more.
it's okay to earn money. Like, you deserve to earn money. I think as women and minorities, we often don't hear that we should ask for money, and we often don't believe that we should ask for money, but I like money, I want more of it, and I need money to support my family. So I believe it's so important.
I totally hear that. Maybe I wonder, not asking for as much money or knowing what our hourly rate is, which kind of goes into what our work is worth. Maybe it's the idea that as writers, we think about what we produce as art. And there's this stereotype of a writer as a quote unquote starving artist, but that's just not a sustainable business mindset at all.
Yeah, I encounter a lot of writers who are more concerned about the craft than making rent, or who maybe think that making rent or focusing on the money will mean they can't focus on their craft. But I swear you need stability to make good art. So you really do need to figure out the sort of basics of this financial model.
That's to say, on our target incomes and all of that, sometimes I honestly don't meet my goals. Things happen, and my annual income has really fluctuated quite a bit depending on how much travel I take on every year. And that's because I really can't take on other projects when I'm on the road. I can't multitask the same way I do when I'm home.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I often try to look at my months in 3-month groups. So it's like, am I making an average of $8,000 a month or $24,000 over 3 months? Because work ebbs and flows. And as we know, a lot of us spend a lot of time hunting down our paychecks, which might all flood in a period of 2 weeks. So sometimes for me, 1 month, I'll bring in $2,000 of income, and then the next month it'll be $10,000. It really kind of goes back and forth.
Okay, Jenny, hardball question number 2 of this episode. How much money are you making now on average?
Yes. So I wrote about this on Medium. I wrote a story about how I made 6 figures my first year of freelancing. And I think it's like the most popular thing I've ever written. I always get messages about it. And around the same time that I put that out, I also sat for an interview with the Seattle Times where my husband and I got real about all of our finances. We talked about a lot of the student debt that we have, which at the time totaled close to $100,000. So people are always really shocked when they hear me talk about all of this transparently. It's like they've seen me naked or something, but I really don't think there's any shame in this. It's all just a number. So through my business, which is called Zest Storycraft, I made $120,000 during my first year of freelancing after expenses. And if you look at the last calendar year, 2019, so the one I'm filing my taxes for right now, I made $135,000 after expenses. You have to remember 25% of that is going into a savings account. So I saw about $100,000 probably in my actual bank account, but that number allowed us to pay down a big chunk of our loans, to afford the lives we live in Seattle in a fairly expensive townhome, and to set aside money for me to go on maternity leave, which was a big part of my goal for last year. So I'm on maternity leave right now. It's almost over, but I generally make my goal amount of between about $8,000 and $10,000 during every month, although, sometimes a little less and sometimes a little bit more. There's the number for you. It's possible to make 6 figures as a freelance writer and editor. So, Wudan, what about you? Tell us your numbers. How much do you make?
Tell me your numbers. I've been able to make around $50,000 the last 3 years pretty consistently, give or take a few $1,000 on either end. In filing for 2019, I believe it was around 54,000. Again, it varies with how much I'm traveling. And honestly, like it's a number I've learned to be okay with. It's enough for me to live on, stash some money away, go on a vacation. In the back of my mind, I always want to make more. And it's challenging for me to find the balance of working on passion projects versus finding things outside of journalism that pay way more. I think the former has really overtaken the latter just because I feel like I'm still trying to establish myself as a writer on different beats, and there are trade offs.
Yeah, there are definitely trade offs. So I think this is where the value stuff comes in. Your values are going to determine how you want to run your business, and then you can set up your finances to make that lifestyle possible. So for me, my business helped me take maternity leave. That's why I was really focused on bringing in a lot. For Wudan, travel is really important. You're going to see variations in income based on what we care about and how we want to live.
Speaking about how we want to live, you know how sometimes you see freelancers on Twitter being like, oh my God, I'm down to my last $50? We don't want you to be that person. We don't want to be that person. Tracking your money will help you not be that person.
Honestly, those tweets give me so much anxiety because you can't trust that your clients are going to pay you on time. Like, that's part of this business. It's one of the hardest things about this business, but you need to be prepared for what happens when someone pays you late. Like, how are you going to pay your rent if a client is a month late on that $2,000 payment for a story? And my answer to that question is that I keep money in a business checking account. That's where I get my paychecks. And then I actually give myself a set amount from that account each month. So I have money left over there for the slower months. It's sort of my like backup plan. Well, Dan, do you have an emergency savings account like all the quote expert finance people recommend for when your paychecks don't come in?
Like I mentioned in that first episode, I didn't have 6 months savings in my checkings when I first started freelancing. And I certainly don't now because it's actually really, really hard to save that much, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
I have a red zone number. It's not 6 months savings, but it's a figure in my checkings that when I start getting there, I need to start figuring out if my paychecks are going to come on time. What am I doing wrong? Like, to me, that's like something is wrong in my system because I thought I had this optimized.
Yeah, I do have an emergency savings account as well. It's in the same spot where I have all my tax money sitting. It's a sort of savings account setup, but I don't have as much in there as everyone recommends. I think we have maybe like 2-ish months of living expenses. You know, we're working on putting more in there now just because we have a kid. I think that all of a sudden I feel like we need a little bit more stability. But like I said, I think it's really hard to save up that much. And I want to be candid about the fact that maybe Wudan and I don't follow the rules and we're still doing this with success.
I think that bears repeating. You don't have to have that 6 month savings or what's quote unquote recommended by the experts, but you do need to have a backup. Decide what your financial comfort zone is or what your risk level looks like and stick to it. Another thing I feel like we should talk about is the privilege of having a safety net or family money or partner support. I get looped into conversations all the time on Twitter about this. Like, oh, if you didn't go to a big name school and you're from a small town or not even in the US and not married or partnered up, freelancing becomes insanely harder for you. Jenni, what do you have to say about that?
So I do think there's a huge amount of privilege inherent in being able to work as a freelance writer. I got a master's degree in journalism, which we can talk about a different time. I don't think it's 100% necessary, but I got a full ride scholarship. And, you know, I think I got a full ride scholarship because I went to a liberal arts college that my parents partially paid for. So I work pretty hard, but I'm also aware that I started my journey with a lot more stability and kind of like halfway up the stairs. I also think it's worth talking about that piece of having a partner who has health insurance. I am the primary breadwinner in my family, but my husband is the one who gives us health insurance and a steady salary. My business is inherently built on some measure of stability, which I wouldn't have without him. I think a lot of financial advice for freelancers doesn't acknowledge these other pieces of the puzzle, which drives me nuts. Like your upbringing, the support you have, your resume. When I tried to freelance the first time, I couldn't make it work because my husband was between jobs and we needed health insurance. And the state health insurance was so expensive that I ended up getting a full-time job instead. That's just the reality. It's a reality for a lot of people. You know, I remember when I first started freelancing, a very experienced freelancer, he'd been freelancing for probably 20 years, sat me down. And his first piece of advice was, do you have a partner? And then is that partner working a job with health insurance? If yes, then you can keep doing this. So this stuff is real, but I do think there's also a measure of confidence that comes in here. So Wudan, you don't have that big name journalism degree, but you do have a partner. How does this all map out for you?
That's right. I didn't go to journalism school. I did my undergrad at an Ivy League school, but that was in science. I hardly did any writing outside of coursework in college. I don't know, frankly, how much that Ivy League degree figures into who takes me seriously when I got started in journalism, though. I think this issue of not being able to make it work without a degree or a partner really ties into confidence or lack thereof. You know what I mean? That feeling like, oh, I'm not qualified to email this editor. They won't respond because they'll find out I didn't go to Columbia Journalism School, or I don't know anyone to pitch to, something like that. Confidence is a privilege, but it can also be built. And I always say that the internet exists. I feel like it's the most equalizing factor in all of this. You can find editors' emails, you can create your own blog for free to showcase your work. At least for me, yes, the internet is really egalitarian for nearly all freelancers.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I think from an editor's perspective, the degree doesn't matter that much. It's really, when I was an editor, what I cared about was your story idea. And, Wudan and I both have kind of similar experiences as freelancers, but very different backgrounds. You can get yourself there without that degree for sure.
And the second part of your question, which I haven't yet answered, on the partner front, my situation has changed tremendously over the years. Yay for being in your 20s. When I first started freelancing, I moved to San Francisco for a few months where my partner at the time lived, and he never asked me to help pay rent. And I think it's still one of the quietest, nicest things anyone's ever done for me, because just trying to make rent in San Francisco can make anyone go broke. And then I was effectively paying rent as a single person for about 4 years, living with roommates and the like, before I moved in with my partner now. Because of income differences, we don't split rent down the middle. What I'll say is most of this living with a partner, it gives me a nice mental safety net if a big check doesn't come in on time, or if I'm working on a long-term project and I know I won't see that money for a while. I manage all the bills. Surprise, I do a lot of emotional labor.
Me too.
Rent, utility, internet. My partner pays me 4 months rent at a given time because he doesn't want to cut a check every month. But also we're getting married sometime, which means our finances will also change and merge, and maybe my mindset will change with all of it. I just don't know what that answer is yet.
All of this is to say that finances don't occur in a vacuum, which is something I think you often don't hear when you hear people talk about the finances of freelancing. So everything in your personal life and your priorities are going to factor into the way that you set up your business, including your family situation, like what you have now and where you came from. I do think, though, that it's possible for anyone to succeed at freelancing, but it's definitely easier for some people than for others.
So let's circle back to that first question we raised at the beginning of this episode. How does this money mindset that we've talked about fuel your work? Or put another way, why should people take the time to think through a financial plan before becoming a freelance writer?
For me, the way I think about money gives me a goal and a sense of purpose. I know where I want to go, and when I know where I want to go, I can build a roadmap to get myself there. This definitely trickles down on a day-to-day basis to my rates, my schedule, the way I would negotiate with a client, and it also helps me know when I can stop working each month. So on a detailed level, I work with a lot of brands, and I rarely take assignments that pay less than $1 a word or $50 an hour. One month, I actually took on a bunch of smaller assignments, and in order to reach my monthly goal, I had to write over 20 stories for 15 clients in like 3 weeks, and it was a total mess. So essentially, I make a lot because I'm really, really productive, but also because I'm pretty aggressive about only taking assignments that work for me financially. It's a lot of saying no, which we will talk about later this season. And it's also worth saying that I don't have as many big bylines because of this strategy. That's a choice that I've made because I want to have a solid income that builds up my family's savings account and pushes us towards paying off our student loan debt. And I also then, with this larger salary, have time to take care of myself, take vacations, things like that, which is what keeps freelancing sustainable for me over the long haul. Those big goals and those big numbers trickle down on a day-to-day basis to the really small decisions. What about you?
I basically only pitch places that'll pay at least $1 a word and cover my expenses if travel is involved. I'm actively looking for opportunities that pay a high hourly rate otherwise. So as an example, I can be paid $1 a word for a single source assignment for a trade publication at 1,000 words. I interview for an hour, put the thing through an AI transcriber, read it, which takes an hour. I know I can write 1,000 words in 2 hours. I spend another hour editing. Do that math, and my hourly rate is around $200. I often say that these assignments subsidize the stuff that I really want to work on. It's not sexy. It still has to be interesting to me. Also, sometimes to make my money targets, I have to negotiate. A little bit goes a long way. This is a business. I value my time, and I really have no shame on putting a dollar amount on it.
Yeah, this is huge. I've definitely become more confident about asking for what I need now that I know what I need. And I see you working that way too, Wudan, because we know what we want and we know it's possible to get paid well because we've seen it happen. I want to tell a story around this actually. So at one point, around a year ago, I was working on a story and I just had that interview come out in the Seattle Times about my financial situation. So I was working with an editor and he had offered me a rate that was too low compared to how much time it was going to take me to report the story. So often I'll do this. I get offered a certain rate. I literally do the math, look at how many hours the reporting is going to take, estimated, and figure out what the hourly rate was. And in this case, it was about $20 an hour when I mathed it out, which is a no, for me with my financial model. So the editor said to me when I was negotiating with him, I saw that article about you and I saw how much you make every year. So I don't think you need the extra money. Pause there for effect. I was like, hold up there, sir. You don't know my financial situation this month. You don't know what it feels like to write a $2,000 check every month for student loans. Like, you don't get to decide how much I need. I decide that. And I believe that my time is worth more than what you're offering. So eventually he did end up paying me more for the story. I worked on it, but I really had to fight for it. So I just want to say, if anything, I think having money makes you do better work and you deserve it because you won't be hectically taking everything that comes your way and feeling panicked. Instead, you'll have the time you need to make good decisions and do good reporting and writing.
I always say that financial stress is the worst type of stress.
Yeah.
Like, it trickles into everything. Suddenly it's, oh my gosh, I can't get paid late. Oh my gosh, I'm just going to take any assignment I can to meet my monthly target. Oh my God, I can't even get a beer with my friend to blow off steam because I don't have that money.
Feels like it spirals for sure, right? The stress turns into a really hefty load that you carry.
Yeah, it's truly a snowball. I mean, I think my father told me this when I was in college about, finances, relationships, school. All of it really snowballs if you're not careful. Anyway, like we said before, we'll send you a worksheet this week if you're an All Access member that's all about thinking through these financial setup questions. How much do you want to make? What are your financial goals to begin with? What does money mean to you? What kind of lifestyle do you want to live? It'll also include a list of our favorite tools to use and books to read, and it'll teach you how to determine your rates. Also, if you're totally overwhelmed, our VIP membership comes with a monthly coaching session. We're happy to help you get set up with a financial system that works for you.
Yeah, obviously we both really like talking about this. So I want to say also as a last thought that I'm very proud of the business that I've built and the standards that I've set for myself. And I think Wudan is as well. It's a feeling we want you all to be able to have when you launch your freelance writing business, because this is a business and you are selling a product and you deserve to be compensated for your skills.
1,000% to all of that. Be shameless. You deserve to make money. And on that note, we're going to head out so we can make money and so can you.
As always, if you have further thoughts to share, please feel free to send us an email or sign up for our newsletter on Substack. All of our membership options can be found on Patreon, where you can join the Writers Co-op Club, and we will see you all next episode. So bye, Wudan.
Bye, Jenny.
Season 1 of the Writers Co-op is made possible by a grant from the National Association of Science Writers. The Writers Co-op is hosted by me, Jenny Gritters, and Wudan Yan, and produced by Susan Vallet.